this time, as Burundians, I would encourage all of us, if you have a friend Tutsi with whom you can speak, sometimes to be brave enough and start that dialogue toward reconciliation.
The Burundi 1972 Genocide Commemoration Conference in Toronto, Canada.
Bientôt, on va passer à la première présentation de l'abbé Ernest Biriruka. Vous êtes le bienvenu.
My dear fellow Burundians, compatriots, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great honor today to be here and talk of my personal experience of 1972, because that's the title that was given to me, to speak of what I saw in 1972. I am a Catholic priest, originally from Ngozi, and I am stationed in Florida, in the city of Fort Lauderdale, which is just north of Miami, but in the Archdiocese of Miami. And I have to say that I am like a three-time survivor of 1972, survivor of the persecution against the church, and also of the Civil War in 1993. Today, we are here to remember, and as I look around, I saw the title put there, Je me souviens. Ce qui est aussi the motto of Canada, Je me souviens. Yes, so I had to remember our fellow Burundians who died in the genocide against the Hutu in 1972. And again, I appreciate very much this opportunity. And I was raised in the countryside, in the commune and province of Ngozi, but church-wise, I belong to the parish of Muhanga, which is located in Kayanza province. At least at that time, that's where it was located. I did my elementary school in Muhanga, and then the minor seminary in Mureke. But the last 3 years of high school at that time were completed in Burasira, which is located not far from Mutaho Market Center. And in fact, Burasira is by Ruvubu River at the limit between Ngozi and Gitega provinces. Many of you, I trust that they know that location, those locations. So the 1972 genocide occurred when I was in the 11th grade in Burasira. Let me also give a little background about Burasira. Burasira was called in French Seminary Moyen de Burasira. It gathered students from all over the country, from Mureke, from Mugera in Gitega, Rusengo, in Muyinga, Rusengo, I should say, and from Kanyosha, and also from Buta in Bururi. It was really very cosmopolitan, but also very polarized by the student Tutsi from Bururi, who believed that they were superior to everyone else. That is where, for the first time, I realized the divisions between the Hutu and the Tutsi. At that time, the rector was a priest, a Tutsi from Muramvya, Monsignor Jack Ndibahezwa, and he had worked in the Diocese of Ngozi for many years and even held the high position of Vicar General. He was a very good man, and he saved many Hutu students from the genocide. I'm not very strong in history, but I want to recall the general atmosphere of the country at that time. From what I could see, I have to admit humbly that I saw very little at that time. I was young, 11th grade, having gone nowhere. I really didn't see a lot of things. But from what I could see and hear, the country was in a kind of turmoil. There were some difficulties. We had, for instance, a terrible famine around 1960. The Prince Louis Rwagasore was assassinated on October 13, 1960. The Prime Minister, Pierre Ngendandumwe, assassinated on January 15, 1965. Prince Inyas Kamatari died in 1964, apparently in an assassination plot, but in reality they said it was a car accident. But the information was so confusing and manipulated by those who are very hungry for power. In reality, the Hutu ascending elite was systematically opposed and eliminated by the Tutsi power, if you like, by the Tutsi power made of the Ganwa and the Tutsi elite at that time. The political situation was turbulent and volatile, that it was very difficult to keep up with the events. Even today, when you look at historic books, you find so many details because, the situation will happen every day, something new, something this, tragic and so forth. It was very difficult to keep up. And again, I was in a seminary, so I didn't have the chance to hear so much. But the situation was even complicated by the rivalries between the Tutsi from Burundi, or the Hima, and the Tutsi from other regions called Abanyaruguru. And they have sometimes deadly conflicts among them. The Rwandan Tutsi refugees in Burundi were also involved in so many things, including attacks against the Rwandan government, the Rwandan Hutu government, and so forth. And then the king, Mwambutsa Bangirichenge, we were told that he liked to enjoy a good time in Switzerland, which justified the enthronement of his younger son, Ntare V, who has the name of Charles Ndizeye. And by the way, at that time I was in the 6th grade in Muhanga, and we were invited to go in Kayanza for his intronization. And I remember going into part of the delegation in a big truck, those that were really like closed practically everywhere. And I don't remember much of the event. I remember some marching parade, but not very much of the event. I was just a kid. Anyway, afterwards, we know that Captain Michel Michombero took over the country on November 28, 1966. Michombero, a Tutsi Hima from Rutovu, Bururi, de facto abolished the monarchy and established the republic. There were also the birth of some groups which look like militias in, I say it as it was, Gerere, that were created at that time. And I remember from my corner how they used to have meetings, maybe political meetings, and marching at the beat of drums. So it was all that, but for me, I have to admit that I could not connect the dots. I was too young. But anybody who wishes to know the genocide, how the genocide came about, has to know the antecedents before the independence time, the Rwandan Hutu revolution in 1957-59 and its influence, and also the turmoil that went on before the independence and after until April 1972. So in 1972, the genocide started, as you know, at the end of April 1972. We would hear rumors of that there were attacks of Hutu rebels and the Muralists from Congo against the Tutsi in Nyanza-Lake, in Rumonge, and other places in Bururi, and that Michombero government was going to fight against them. We did not have any detailed information. By the way, you remember that at that time, the only source of information accessible to the people was the national radio, and very few people had a radio receiver to follow the news. That's why things were difficult, like to know with exactitude. Anyway, we had also at that time that king, the young king Ntare the Fifth, was in Uganda, was repatriated and imprisoned in Gitega, and then afterwards assassinated. We did not know the details, but we were aware that the government was slaughtering the Hutu, supposedly for collaborating in those attacks against the Tutsi in Nyanza-Lake and so forth in those territories. Now, in perspective, I know that even though there could have been Hutu rebel attacks, they were insignificant, and the whole things of 1972 is really, that was like the attacks of the Hutu serves as justification for the brutal repression which followed. For instance, I have some students I know in Musenyi, that is in Ngozi, students in high school who were killed in 1972. And I was like, how could these school children be involved in the rebellions of the Hutu? Now we know that all this was like prepared little by some extremists, Tutsi from Bururi mainly, like Albert Shibura, Artemon Simbananie, who had vowed to clean the country of all Hutu. Some others are known, like Jean Tiruhama, Andrew Muhigwa, Albin Nyamoya, who was from Ngozi, by the way, who was nicknamed Nyamunsi, Zeno Nichaenzi, Thomas Dabemeye, and Jean-Baptiste Bagaza. I dare say this name because most of the Burundians never knew that he was also involved in the genocide. He was involved because he worked in the army headquarters in Bujumbura at that time. And I did go to great length at one time to check with an eyewitness. Unfortunately, that eyewitness has passed away. It was the Abbé Juvenal Bukuyeko from Muhanga, who was army chaplain at that time. And he assured me, he said, we were every morning together when they say Kwiperu. We were together every morning. So I know he was there in 1972. He stayed like in the background, not so well known for his role, but he was also there. Anyway, of course, the notorious Lieutenant General Michel Michombero. As a student in Burasira, we split into two groups between the Hutu and Tutsi. Personally, I was rejected by the Hutu because they thought I was Tutsi, and I could not join the Tutsi because I'm not one. So anyway, it was a very tragic moment. The Tutsi students tried to kill us. They went to Mutaho market and bought knives and swords, and on the way cut big sticks of eucalyptus wood, ready to attack in the night. I believe it was around May 10th, 1972. But some Hutu students saw it, and they went to Monsignor Jack Ntibahezwa to denounce the plot. And actually, they have stored those clubs and swords or knives in a room like at my room was like here, and the other one was like 2 rooms away from where we lived at that time in Baptiste Rouge in Burasira. And I saw when Monsignor came to collect those weapons and how he had 2 students carry those weapons to go to hide them. In the following day, the military came by asking if there was peace, because supposedly they would come to finish off after the attack of the Tutsi by night, but it was peaceful. And the same students, they tried to organize another attack before the end of the year. But Monsignor Ntibahezwa did everything he could to finish like about a week early the school year that year, so that he can send us on vacation to avoid that the military would come and surprise us there. That's why I said he protected many Hutu students. At that time also, those who were killed in Ngozi, I believe it was Governor Bizoza at that time, some were transported by night by big trucks, were transported to go to be buried in mass graves by the rivers Ruvironza and Mubarazi. I saw traces of blood, because in the day we would sneak out to look to see what has happened. There were traces of blood, which image staying engraved in my brain forever. When I got home during that vacation, I saw that many neighbors had been already taken away and killed. If I say a few names here, my dear friends, I would like to remind that what was happening in that little corner where I lived was happening all over the country. Okay? So allow me to say a few names. For instance, Sebatwa, who was an ex-soldier, Sekaganda, a communal accountant, who was a relative of our family, Sylvestre Baransegeta, Mark Hakizimana, and some of all the school teachers of Muhanga and around that we knew. They were taken. In Makawa, a man called Mekior was called Uncle, and his son Davinus was also military. They were taken. My first school teacher, Pio Choi, in first grade, and then the other teachers like Gaspar Ndisha and the principal of in Muhanga, Francois Charaziwe, Iwar Masabo. All those were taken, never saw them again, and even my parish priest, Pascal Kayehe, he was killed. In Mureke, our financial, or what they call econom, Father Marcel Simbandumwe, was also killed, and 2 of our Burundian teachers, Patrice and Prote, I believe they were from Busiga. Anyway, of all the Hutu students of my home parish of Muhanga, only 4 of us survived. Me and a man called Adelaine Ndungumburanye, and 2 other students, one fled to Rwanda, another one to Congo. Among all the students who were in high school, we were only the 4 to survive. And the situation was such that you could not even mention that anybody has been taken. We were told, if you mention somebody who has been taken, you're going also to be killed. And they would use an expression. They say, Nahonyene, you're going to be killed. Nahonyene, so gi, you're going to be killed immediately. Hiket nunk. So, as you know, unfortunately, that's why there are no memorials, traditional memorials, for instance. There was no mass said for anybody I know at that time as a mass intention. No, it was just mourning in silence, weeping in silence. There was no, don't mention anybody, don't say anything. In other cases, for instance, I know some women who would go to check on their husbands in Ngozi prison. The story goes that the military would just take those baskets of food and throw them far away and say, "What are you doing here? Go home, go home." But they won't tell them they have been killed. But of course, we know they were. By the way, in Ngozi itself, one of the mass grave was in a kind of eucalyptus plantation. For those who are familiar with Ngozi, there was a road coming from the market and coming, stopping by, going by the military camp and ending to the big water tank of the hospital. Now, if you go there, you would not see anything. You wouldn't even know that there was that road going there. But I know it because that's where is my hometown. And that road was closed because they had a big mass grave in that wood, and they closed the roads for people not to see. That's how the whole thing started. But then many of the other who were killed in Ngozi were shipped by trucks to be buried by the river, the Ruvironza and Mubarazi, where we have those camps. I think the commission might have done some excavation over the bones or whatever, and it was a big disaster. So now we know. That's how I say it. Now we know that what happened in Ngozi was happening all over the country in the same fashion. Afterwards, for instance, I heard horrible stories that were happening. For instance, one of the stories that stayed in mind was how they killed the father of Professor Melchior Ndadaye, that some of you know, who I think is emeritus professor from Sudbury. He was a classmate. And he was telling me that they invited the population of Matyazo to go to attend like a kind of political meeting. And when the people were there, the soldiers just started killing everyone. So they didn't know. They said, come to a political meeting. And then that was it. The same way as many who went voluntarily, like to the authority, they say, well, we just want to question them, about something, nothing major, nothing grave. So they would go innocently and then never come back. I heard, for instance, about what happened in Mugamba, that the Tutsi would cut bamboo trunks in Migano, and they would sharpen them, and they would thrust those bamboo into the Hutu. I heard about the Hutu killed around Bukeye. That was a witness of one of the catechists I met in Burundi. And he said that the corpses of the Hutu were piled up like when you pile stones, waiting for a truck to come gather the stones for construction. I heard also a story where they said that some went to plead with Archbishop Andre Makarakiza, who was Archbishop of Gitega at that time. They went to plead with him to save some Hutu students. And he says, no, don't worry. Those who are doing those things are the future leaders. And while some Tutsi, of course, were brave enough to save some Hutu by hiding them or warning them so they can run away. Yes, I'm sure there are witnesses of the kind. But the general slaughter was against the Hutu. Now we know, for instance, what had been labeled as the Simbananiye Plan. The Simbananiye Plan, I read it in a historic dictionary of Burundi. It's called Historic Dictionary of Burundi, and he's number 8 in some dictionaries they wrote about Africa. Is published by the Scarecrow Press, Nantucket in New Jersey, 1976. So it says, known also as Report Politique number 93/100 CAB/68 of 1968. It was authorized by André Muhigwa and completed in 1967 by Artemon Simbananiye, who was then Minister of Justice. A Hutu member of the cabinet obtained a copy. The plan was divided into 3 phases. The first phase, to show hatred between the ethnic groups by blackening some noted Hutu intellectuals. Second, physical liquidation of the head of the state to plunge the country into confusion and anger. Third, on the basis of false rumor, denounce the Hutu for a replay of 1965, which means the aborted Hutu revolt. He says, all we need to do then is to launch a repression against pre-selected targets among the Hutu and claim power as ransom for our zeal. After this, sweep apartheid will reign in Burundi and the Hutu peril will be forever destroyed. When I went in the major seminary of Bujumbura, it was 1974, I was very eager to read everything I could find. And of course, one of the things is the death toll of the Hutu. The government of Michombero admitted like 80,000. You know that the Boniface Fidel evaluated at 350. My own estimate, maybe there were 250,000. I say my own estimate as I try to reflect on the many sources. But anyway, when I went to the major seminary, there was a priest, he was no longer in Burundi, called Van O. Straten, who had condemned the killings. And in response, some Tutsi priests, including Adrien Habona, wrote a short document justifying the Michombero government. That document is titled Dossier Burundi, and it was officially distributed to us as we entered the major seminary of Bujumbura. And by way of comparison, it is similar to the document that was written by the Dominican Kagabo Liboire and his colleagues after the Ntega Marangara. But this time, as you know, their writing was condemned both by the church and other opinion groups. I had to understand yet the whole situation, and I share with you some of the names I remember who wrote. For instance, Professor René Marchand, who was professor of history in Bujumbura. He wrote quite extensively. And Ambassador Thomas Patrick Milady, who was U.S. ambassador to Burundi at that time. Thomas Patrick Milady, the title of his book is Tragic Years. And in the report, in it, he reports how the bulldozers were digging mass graves in the plain somewhere. But the major witness, as you know, that to me that helped me to make sense of the situation was the one written by the Ganwa Boniface Fidel Kiraranganya, La Vérité sur le Burundi. This man, he truly put his life at risk to be able to write that kind of witness. He became a refugee here in Canada. May I ask, is he still alive?
No, he's gone.
Oh, may he rest in God's peace. So anyway, I met him personally a few years back, I think in Montreal, but we were not able to have a good moment to talk, and I missed that opportunity. And so all these were prepared by those Tutsi extremists to get rid of the danger of the Hutu. Le peril Hutu. Where did this idea of Hutu danger come from? It is my understanding that it came about because of the Rwandan Hutu revolution in 1955, 1959, apparently because the Rwandan Tutsi who sought refuge in Burundi would advise their fellow Burundian Tutsi that if they do not act quickly, they would suffer the same situation that as they suffered in Rwanda. But we cannot exclude the turbulences that were already in Burundi that led to the genocide. Look, for instance, many now they say, well, all the Burundians were the same, we are equal, and so forth. I will say, hold on a minute. What I saw does not testify to that equality. But there is one thing to what I saw from my corner where I grew up. There were no animosities like that came from the politicians fighting against each other. So what I saw, what I know is that Burundi has the Ganwa, or the princely clans, and that the Ganwa were allied to the Tutsi, and the Tutsi are known as the pastoralists because most of them or some of them had cattle, Inca, which was the highest value of the land at that time. The Hutu were often associated with the serving class and who mainly were cultivators of the land. And then the Twa, who were at the lowest, a tiny minority, and who lived excluded from the community. For instance, I never seen, for instance, a gathering where the Hutu and Tutsi would admit the Twa to come to share in the drink, for instance, or in the food. And my father was a good man. He was among the first Catholics of the area. But when the Twa would show up, when they had like banana wine, he would give them some. They would be outside the enclosure to share. So that was not invented by the Belgians. And you can follow up with the concept of gusaba, kugabirwa, ubugererwa, ubuhake Rwanda, kwihutura, kwitwatura, kunena, gucumukenke, and those concepts that show that the society was not really like unified at that level. But again, please know that this was like a system accepted in the country. There were no animosities or no fighting because of the ethnies. But the Belgians, what they did, when they realized these structures, they chose to continue to favor the Ganwa and the Tutsi in order to use them to dominate the masses of the Hutu and the Twa. One of the most indicative factors is how they sent sons of the Ganwa and Tutsi to school. For instance, in Astrida Butare, in Rwanda, so that they can prepare future functionaries way before they could send the Hutu. Apparently, some reports say that it was around 1945, somewhere there, that they started realizing the imbalances between those who were formed and so forth, and started sending some Hutu as well in the schools. The Twa at that time were not in the picture. No, the Twa were not in the picture. Anyway, the Hutu who went to school then realized the social imbalances or the segregations and reacted. As we said in Rwanda, it was that rebellion. And I don't have the statistic, but I believe that more than 10,000 Tutsi were killed in that revolution in Rwanda. And many went into exile in neighboring countries, Uganda, Congo, Tanzania, Burundi. And it is then because of that the Burundian Tutsi started acting to prevent that the same thing, the thing that happened in Rwanda would happen in Burundi. By the way, this kind of genocide in Rwanda bears the visceral fears that prompted the FPR that was going to do the same to the Hutu, and the Hutu reacted. And also, when the Rwandan Hutu saw what happened in 1972, they kept that in mind. I believe there is this interaction and influence in our mentality. Remember that many things we feel, sometimes we do not express them. They stay just within us, and that is a fact, you know. So I would like to conclude by saying that the 1972 genocide had a lot of consequences, whether we look at on social level, economic level, political, and so forth. That's what generated what we call the Burundian apartheid, because after the genocide, everything was in the hands of the Tutsi, whether the army, the government, the police, the judges, school directors, the university, the religious even the religious leaders, like in the schools, everything was in the hands of the Tutsi practically. If there were any Hutu who escaped, who was involved like in the government, it was a kind of like show-off image to say, no, look, we don't have any apartheid. There is somebody like so-and-so, but they did not have any power per se. As you know, also in the University of Burundi, the Hutu were excluded from some faculties. The first example is the Faculty of Law. They could not let any Hutu student in that faculty. No. They wouldn't let any Hutu be formed in the law. Some others, like in the economy, the Hutu will be oriented in the shorter cycle to get like a bachelor's degree, and we're not allowed to go higher. But the most damning fact was that every time in April, there will be a rumor that there are going to be attacks. So the poor Hutu students would run away from the school. It was just so unfortunate. Anyway, on the other hand, of course, a Hutu student, to be able to study, sometimes he needed some financial support. And since the Tutsi were the ones who are in the government, in all those functions of government, they have the means to pay for their nephews, their sons, whatever. This is what I called the endo-ethnic circle of development. Endo-ethnic circle of development, at least at that time, because the Hutu had no means to go forward. The Tutsi have every tool to be able to develop. And I started labeling this as I analyzed, as a work of philosophy, the political discourse that Bagaza did when he took the power. It was one of my major social analysis work to work on that discourse. So logically, at that time, you take all the Tutsi in all those sectors, in the government and so forth, earning money, and the Hutu, what did they have? Just the land, a little bit of the land. So the development was really like endo-ethnic. Anyway, there was another social fact that we should not forget. The traumatization the traumatization and victimization of the entire Hutu population. I still remember, some of you might as well, how they would talk indirectly of Abamenja, Ibifamutima, Inyankaburundi, Inkozi z'ikibi. Those were the Hutu named indirectly. And by the way, this is also what happened in Rwanda after genocide. All the Hutu became victimized. They said that they were like as everybody has participated in the genocide. So it was in Burundi, the Hutu were regarded as the ones who committed crimes against the Tutsi in those rebel attacks at the beginning. So this bears a very psychological impact that it was very difficult to overcome for many of the Hutu. Given also that you could never in public make a comment of these events. So there was no instance where you could like get it out and speak and hear somebody else speak. Anyway, the earlier it was mentioned how they do not know the sufferings of Burundi. I have to say that, for instance, in the framework of my parishioners, when they come to me, they say, your country, Rwanda. And I say, no, excuse me, I'm not from Rwanda, I'm from Burundi. And mind you that it is very difficult to explain the genocide of the Tutsi, because of the Hutu, because they think that it's the Hutu who committed the genocide, and they see it in the context of Rwanda. I always tell them, if you want to understand the situation of Burundi, you have to realize that Rwanda is like here and Rwanda is there, and his opposite, more or less, you know, in the grosso modo, as they say, is like the opposite of the other situation. So the racial exclusion continued under Bagaza, as you know, the E and U, you know, for the schools, the persecution against the church because they suspected the church was promoting the Hutu. That was the real reason against the persecution against the church in Burundi, that they thought that the church was promoting the Hutu. There was also suspicions that Bagaza was preparing for another genocide. I heard some rumors about that. But then everything was continued by Buyoya, the same line, you know, Ntega Marangara. And I would say that danger remains even today, and we cannot ignore it. We cannot ignore it, and this time, as Burundians, I would encourage all of us, if you have a friend, Tutsi, with whom you can speak, sometimes to be brave enough and start that dialogue toward reconciliation. Parenthesis, my thesis of licentiate in theology, which I did in Ireland in 1991, is based on the theology of reconciliation between the Hutu and the Tutsi. As we are driving here today, I was telling Mr. Fabien Chishahayo that we're not really entering yet into that dialogue of reconciliation. You will find that we, the Hutu, could have their groups, how they share, and so forth. Do they share the same thing with the Tutsi? I don't know. You prove me wrong if that happens. The Tutsi would have their own way of talking of the events, the political events, and so forth. Do they share that with the Hutu in Burundi? I don't think so. So we still have a long way to go, not only to prevent these kind of tragedies, but truly to someday to get to a true reconciliation between our groups. Thank you very much.